Hello and welcome to the second day of our gathering. Ricky's here to join us, and Ricky is going to talk to us about asset-based community development, ABCD for short. So thanks, Ricky.
Thanks, Meg.
No worries.
Appreciate it. Oop. Don't fall over. Okay, so if you see my phone up here, it's just because in the new tech age, people don't wear watches anymore, so I need to keep track of time somehow. Thanks for having me here. It's been a great time to be here yesterday, to hear stories from family members, from people with a disability themselves, some great conversation during the breaks, as always. And some of the things that we heard about yesterday, which relate to what we're going to talk about and have an opportunity to actually practice today, are three things. So we've heard about what people can do that institutions can't. And so there's many things you'll reflect on in your own life that you've done that were because either you knew an institution couldn't do that, or you didn't want them to do that, or they could but they didn't. We heard what institutions and people can do together. So where people have worked together with some sort of institution for a good life. And then some things that institutions can do that people can't. So we'll explore these notions today. There'll also be some themes that come up in terms of how needs are met. So you'll hear me talk a little bit about the functions of community life. You know, what is the function of our neighborhoods and our local communities? What needs can and should be met in that way? And there'll also be this sense of where people are at different stages in their life and kind of seeking this renewal and reconnection with people around their area. How do we go about identifying those opportunities? You know, what are we looking for? How do we know what's around? Kind of have our eyes wide open. So before I kind of go into the plan for today, I just want to read a little something that I think might highlight. It's a little story from one of the founders of asset-based community development here. So just bear with me here. So John, one of the authors of this book, and I'll share a few books throughout, I think, family advocacy. Most places have a bookstore. This one's called The Connected Community by Cormac Russell. But most of the capacity building organizations have some great resources. So John, one of the authors of this book, loves to visit the west of Ireland. When he travels there, he rents a little house near a lake. He enjoys fishing, and so travels with an easily assembled fishing rod. Must be nice. On one occasion, he didn't have any bait. So he went to a little store in the local village and asked the gentleman here, "Do you have any bait?" The shopkeeper replied, "What do you mean by bait?" Well, John said, "Like, worms." The shopkeeper looked surprised. He said, "On your way into my shop, did you see those two big whitewashed stones on each side of the door you walk through? Well, if you go out there and turn one of them over, you'll find a lot of worms, and they'll provide you all the bait that you need." So this story really, I share that because it offers a great life lesson that for the most part, and of course there's exceptions to every rule, all around us, almost everywhere and in everything, all around us is everything we're looking for if we're really prepared to look for it, and also to live within reasonable limits. So the truth is really hard to see if we think we have a way, the way to a good life is to buy it. So today we're going to look at, how do we look at what's around and really be the creators of that, the makers, the producers. So here's a bit of our plan for today in short. There is a plan. There we go. Have I done something wrong? Just let me know. So we're going to look at how do we shift from looking at what's wrong to what's strong. And this isn't on an individual level. Most of you in this room have gotten to where you are, and you're here because you're the latter. You're the people that look at what's strong in your loved ones, in the people around you, many times in local communities. Others don't always see it that way, and on a community level, it's much easier to look at what's wrong in other people as well, and what's the needs or the deficits. So we'll look at that. We're going to have a great family guest speaker panel. Then we'll take some of these ideas into what do we do about this? How do we put this into action? Then it's going to be a very practical afternoon where we'll go into an asset mapping activity. So we'll do some of that here. Then you'll go out in small groups into the local Wollongong area. We've planned and prepared and made sure that where you're going, there's going to be some substance there. And then part of the journey with the day is also going to be much like you'd experience back in your own local communities, that you can plan so much, and then sometimes you just have to go with what you feel and what's in front of you there. So one of the things that's really important to get clear on is what we're talking about when we mean community. Many people here would have experienced when someone says community, and you might have heard this many times about going out into community, being involved in community, participating in community, used in different ways. And for many, that means services. People talk about community and they go straight to services. And that's one element. Those institutions or businesses are part of community life, but there's really more to it. It's really this social place, this sense of human connectedness, almost an emotional element as well that's attached. So family, friends, neighbors, neighborhood associations, schools, clubs, civic groups, local enterprises, churches, so quite broad. Thinking about finding the strength in community, it's often understanding where to find those hidden treasures that are out there, because the community life can be quite the treasure chest. We just need a map to know how we know what we're looking for and where to go. And we need some tools, some keys in order to be able to unlock those treasures and what's going good around us. So I hope you followed that analogy. I was trying to follow in Judith's footsteps from yesterday with the Scrum analogies and all sorts. So these are just a few little tidbits from the Connected Communities Guide that Resourcing Inclusive Communities have. If you haven't checked that out, it's a really worthwhile resource. But some of the ones I wanted to highlight that might be really relevant for yourselves here is being involved in community life allows two parties to do a chance to do some things. So on an individual level, there's things that around contribution, to be known more intimately, to expand networks, to assume roles, valued roles, to feel safe. And so for many people here, those things like for themselves or your loved one, to be able to be known more intimately is a really great safeguarding and strategy around feeling safe and a part of community life. To be known and know others is something that allows people to further on their relationships and the roles that they have. So they're really elements that it has so much to offer people. And it offers communities. We think of it as sometimes one-sided, but this is also a chance for people that may have never had the opportunity to be in relationship with someone with a disability. It allows people the chance to deepen their relationships. It builds the social capital. So sometimes people might have heard about the social fabric of community life that happens. It allows people to increase their membership. Most communities, whether it be a sporting club or a voluntary association or a parents group, want more volunteers. So this involvement allows people to deepen their membership. It also allows communities to receive contributions from people that they may have never thought as having anything to contribute. It also helps communities to understand people's real needs, and that their need might not be more services and supports, but rather more people to be around and to be there and to really care. And the increase in local economy. We heard stories yesterday about micro-enterprise and market stall holders, and so that being involved in community life also has this element of creating more of a local economy. And so when we talk about being included in community life, this is an important way to look at it. One definition, I suppose, of community inclusion, and bear in mind it's just one definition, but when people are known by name and know of others by name and their contribution is valued, acknowledged, supported, and rewarded. We heard Rhiannon yesterday talked about friends and classmates, the relationships she had with them, and the being missed when she isn't there. And so we can think about that element of the relational, that her contributions are acknowledged, they're supported, they're rewarded, so much so that people, are wondering, where have you gone? So just a bit of a brief on asset-based community development. This gathering is a quite informal event. And so I don't want to stand up here sort of, lecturing about it, but I also want to provide people with some information so that they don't leave here and are wondering, what is this all about? So I've mentioned I'm from Chicago. These two gentlemen are also from Chicago. I didn't discover asset-based community development until I moved to Townsville. And at the time, I was about to go to Melbourne Cup, to a function. I didn't know what Melbourne Cup was, but everyone was going out wearing fancy hats. And I was not working in community life at the time, but that's always been a passion and an interest of mine. And so I stopped into this I thought before I go out and, to this fancy hat party, I'll stop into this small community organization called Inclusion Works. And there was a guy, Rick Thompson, who was working there. And so I stopped in. I gave my resume, told them how interested I was in what they did. We went out. They called me a little while later and said, someone's just resigned, and can you come in tomorrow for an interview? So life is about timing, I guess. And lo and behold, their main work was around working with one person at a time and one community at a time, and really trying to bring the both of them together. They knew that community life had not had the opportunities to relate to people with disabilities because people with disabilities had not been involved in those communities. And so it was these two parties that kind of like a neighbor you've never talked to but you want to. And their main work started in the 1990s in Chicago, where there was lots of urban housing, kind of ghettos where they'd, under some sort of great idea, had moved people who were on welfare or struggled with income, and then they realized that didn't work. And so they had to look at, what do we do here? How do we look at Chicago as a great place to be? And they went across thousands of houses, knocking on doors and asking people a few questions. What do you like about Chicago? What's strong here? And what do you care a lot about here locally? And they uncovered some great ideas. And if you so like a book, there is a big book that is digital as well, called Building Communities from the Inside Out. It's kind of more of a uni type book, but there's some really good practical resources in there. And so we'll look at this what's strong rather than what's wrong here. I just want you to think about and perhaps jot down on a notepad 2 things that'll prime us for later. Our brains are we're reptilian or mammals or whatever way you want to think about it, but we're primed for fear, so we often prepare for the worst situation, and it's easy to think about, what's not going so well or the doom and gloom. But this is something that really is important to think about. So what is one gift or strength that you've used recently? If I think about myself, for example, I have a knowledge and a passion for social enterprise, small social businesses that contribute to the local economy. And so that's a piece of knowledge I have, a skill of the head, I guess. And so I've assisted someone recently who has a passion for lawn care, gardening, upkeep of his own property to start his own mowing and gardening enterprise. So that's one gift I've used recently. It might be that you're part of a committee, and so you've got some really great note-taking skills. A lot of you bring gifts here to this gathering. So what's something you've used or shared recently, or perhaps a loved one of yours has. And then the second thing is thinking about your local area. So whatever neighborhood or community you're from, what's something that people have done together in your local neighborhood or your local community that's made the community better? You know, have they planted a little garden, started a walking group? You know, have they had a little music group they've gotten together, had a community street party, you know, a play out the front with kids playing out the front? What, you know, people sharing baked goods recipes. It doesn't have to be big or lavish. I think about my local community, and I have two sons, a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old, and school for the oldest is a little bit tricky, and so I often think about how education could be outside of the institution, because that's only one place where that possible need could get met, is the institution of the school. How can communities be educational? And so something that we've done together recently that's really made the local community better is the kids have ran the oldest, the young one just tags along for a little bit of a payday. They've ran a little lemonade stand. So I realized that the oldest one is really crafty and good at making things, so he's made this little stand. And the younger one is more sort of physically, he just wants to hand out lemonade and do things. And what that's led to is that people have stepped forward to say, I grow lemons, I can contribute that. You know, my kids also want to do a lemonade stand. Would you be willing to like set it up and maybe your kids do a little bit and then our kids come and they can do it for a little while? And so I think about things like that as far as what's made communities better. Just a few of the guiding principles here that are important to really understand if we are to work in community life and work in ways where communities are better off. There's this thinking that we are enough, that what we seek exists around us, and that it's important we build a culture in our local communities and in the communities that we're a part of and our loved one is a part of, so that there's this, together we are doing these things. Together we can do this. We have everything we need here. And this is in contrast to some of the dilemmas that we face where people start with the answer. People probably outside of this room start with the answer. They recruit people to implement that answer. And then there's the needs, the services, the consumer mindset. And they'll look for more needs and answers to keep that going. It really frames people as helpless, as dependent on external help. And we see that, I see that plenty of times with families, that it's almost, not good enough, or that those people don't have the answers. And so external entities will come in with almost the answer already, imposing that upon them. And it continues this cycle. So what we're aiming to start with here is more of a learning conversation. So we're starting with, who are people? What do they care enough about to act upon? What are they good at? We heard George yesterday, and the advice he gave was around starting with people's interests, starting with their gifts and their talents. And I didn't put any of that into my presentation because I feel like that is ingrained in family advocacy and the way that people relate to other people. If we have that really good knowledge and we know people really well and we know what might they care about to act upon, we also need to figure out, what do people in community life care about? What's important to them? What type of people are they? Who do they relate to? And how do we kind of mobilize these community members to really be producers of this shared vision? Because ultimately, long after we're around, you want something to keep being produced, and by whom might be other local community members. The things that we're kind of up against in this is time, and not time as in years, but time as in we get so busy in our lives that time comes from less about enjoying the time and a very rigid structure, whereas community life is more about enjoying the company of others. It can be about come on in, stay for as long as you need, more of that relational approach, whereas time can be, even time as in our bed becomes our workspace or the kitchen table becomes the office. The change of the home and the local community becomes more transactional and time pressured. So people might not have or make the time to relate to each other as much. Also in the need for continued communication and frequent communication, making space for silence and just being can be really hard. And then the storytelling, so both creating the stories and the telling of them. So I just want to jump here to, I talked about communities and the functions of communities here. How many of you, just by show of hands, thinking about the functions of care, hospitality, learning, safety, celebration, economic development, or the local economy, food production, and sorry, that might just be a little hard to see there, but food production. How many would say that all of these functions are happening in your local neighborhood, just by show of hands? Are some? Okay, so there's some over there. 10%. What about some? Are some of them? Yeah. So some, it's not to say that none of these are happening in your local communities. It's to really highlight that by default, by the way that we've designed communities, not only in how they're built, but in how social life happens and associational life happens, we're more likely to outsource these. We're more likely to believe that we can just pay for them, and that we don't necessarily have the answers or the ways to make this happen. But we've heard stories here that are in contrast. So for someone who loves to cook, there's the opportunity to meet the needs here of food production and hospitality locally. Or someone who's a great listener and enjoys conversation, there's that care, that hospitality, the celebration that goes along with that. Now, I don't go for an AFL team or an NRL team, although I'm impartial to the Cowboys just living in Townsville. They did win the premiership in 2015, so I will point that out. But most communities can be really compared in a sporting lens to a football game, where 30,000, 60,000, in America, 120,000 people turn up who might need the exercise, and they'll watch the 12, 24, 36 people on the field who really don't. They're pretty fit. They don't need to move around anymore. So our community life needs exercise. Like, you're all well-exercised people in thinking about what a good life is, in actually having the courage, the fortitude, the wherewithal to slowly, steadily move forward and bring other people into the fold. Neighborhoods and community life haven't been as well exercised because we go one place for the local economy, we work elsewhere. Care gets outsourced to people who aren't from the local community, aren't our neighbors. Even the production of food gets outsourced. The local celebrations aren't happening there. Even safety gets outsourced to we need police, rather than what really keeps people safe. And we heard that yesterday from Judith and others about communities and people in communities really keep people safe. And we know that people who have some of these labels or characteristics, they have things to contribute. Communities haven't naturally created space or seen value or provided opportunities, but they can. And so there's two things that we're going to look at here today when we're going into these activities. And just in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to some of this family guest speaker panel here. But there's two maps that we can look at. One is a needs map. So the community has needs. We know that. We believe they have weaknesses. People are too disabled to make change or know answers or contribute here to this community. And people are more consumers of outside services or care or programs. And so there's this servicing of community life. People come in, and that's one way we can look at it, and then we get kind of needs maps. And in a past life, this is where I've started. You look at what are all the needs of the community and how do you find something that meets the need. Apply for a grant, have some service that... The other way that we can look at this is in the assets. So what are the strengths, not only of people, but of local community life? What are the opportunities, the abilities, the capabilities, the collaboration and relationships that could come from that? How do we strengthen community and the importance of community relationships? And then that bottom right of leadership by stepping back. How do we create space to just step back from everyday community members? And so I just want to share a really quick story before I bring three amazing speakers up here. And so I was thinking about this for a guy who loved anime. And for some of you with maybe teenagers, you might have heard of anime. It's kind of a Japanese cultural influenced show, cartoon style show, but not in a kid way. Many adults watch it. It's quite popular. He really loves it. He reads books. He watches tons. He listens to the soundtracks of them. It's a real gift, a passion, a talent of his. And we had to think about what's around in Townsville where someone who loves anime might get involved in some way. Who's around? What's around? And we looked and we found, okay, well, there's a local university, James Cook, and they had an anime club. And so he was going to go there. We did all the looking around, went a few times, much like you're going to do today. We went for a look to see what goes on. And we discovered there was opportunities for him to contribute as a member where he could learn what the group does, when it meets, meet people that are also interested in it. And he thought this group was starting to not meet as frequently, and he wanted to still pursue that interest in anime. So we thought, well, you could start your own. So off we went, figuring out, how one might become an anime club host or organizer. One of the assets that we connected to was the local library, because we were thinking about what might be place, what's the setting of where he's going to be. And not only did the library come forward with, we have the place, but here's a library staff member that's willing to help you with co-creating the flyer and organizing the space itself and doing the equipment setup and organizing the paperwork of how it all goes about. And so there was a great connection into community life, that individual to association, actually individual to institution connection. He didn't have the space, but the institution did. They also helped introduce him to other members, people who had expressed interest in anime at the library that might want to come to this. And so long story short, he had a series of regular gatherings over about a year where members from different places around Townsville came to be. And what this led to is a few things. It led to him, this is about 8.5 years ago, so very early on in my time in Townsville. It's led to him having a group of 4 friends from that still get together, and he's still the host. He hosts it at his house. They're really, really close friends. He's joined a writing group because he met people there who are also part of a writing group. And so much so that the other day I got a message from him saying, I'm trying to help so-and-so find a job. Can you, do you have any ideas? And this was sort of out of the blue, and I thought, now here's someone who had gone from not really being involved at all to now he's, in any friend group, there can be kind of the leaders of the friend group or people who are contributing in some way. And so now the gift he's trying to contribute is he works and he wants to help a friend go on that journey he did to find work. So I share this because it's really the power of local communities. We could have gone out and found a service where they had an anime group and things might look a little bit different. Okay. So I just want to bring these 3 lovely people up here. Joe Cross, if you could please, yep. Alex and Elise. So we've created this section here. I can't really say we, but Resourcing Inclusive Communities, Family Advocacy have been instrumental in figuring out who might be people to share, what might they share, and I think I speak for everyone when I say yesterday, when you heard from some of those panels, people got a lot out of that. There's so much that comes from the magic of people's experience in community life. And so what I'll probably ask people to do, and I'll have you go first, Joe, is you can decide at your own leisure, because it's very democratic, whether you want to stand and use the clicker or you want to sit and I can shuffle slides. So what I'll have each family member do is, I think it's really great to hear from people directly. They'll share a bit of a story, and then I'll ask questions along the way. Yeah. If you see me cut people off, yeah, it will just, but we'll be fine. So, yeah, Joe, feel free to take it away.
So, Rachel's a 29-year-old woman who you met yesterday. She's a sassy, vibrant young woman that loves company of others her own age. She's very active, as you heard about pole dancing yesterday. She's very much involved with the pole dancing community and her friends in the pole dancing community. So the nature of Rachel's disability means that motor skills are challenging for her. So so she requires a lot of practice. And so, so we embarked on our idea of pole dancing, and I think we've got a slide coming up. I can, yep. Oh no, sorry, the one before.
Great.
Sorry, yeah.
That's not the right one.
No, that's this the one. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Just to give you a little bit of an introduction how we came to pole dancing, because that is not something that I would ever have thought of in a million years. So obviously Rachel enjoyed a full life in her local mainstream school. She's obviously in a stage production in the primary school. A birthday party that was, we've got, she uses a wheelchair, so trying to get people to come to your house was a little bit difficult. So we would have parties in the park. Excursions. The top photo in the centre there is Rachel attending Girl Guides. We tried Girl Guides, and you've got to be places and try things to see if they're going to work. And Girl Guides didn't really work for us. They were lovely people. They were trying to include us, but it was just too fast paced for her. A lot of noise, and it was just really difficult for her to. She engaged, but it was just not working for her. But one of the activities, they had an international dress-up night. And so Rachel wore, she's the second from the left, and she wore my sister's character costume with my sister used to dance. And so the character costume is a Polish costume. And so for Rachel to have a photograph, we needed to have something for her to hold herself up on. So she's holding herself up on the pole, and I just made a real smart comment when I come home, oh, look, we've got a pole dancer. You know, she was 11 or 12. You know, that's not sort of something you think about for 11 or 12-year-olds. So that just sat in the background. And so later on, obviously, we came to the idea of she loves music, she loves dance. And for her to join a dance class, it was going to be very difficult because she needed to hold herself up on something. And so then I suddenly thought, pole dancing, everybody in the class has a pole. So that's how that came about, because it's not something I would have thought of. Yeah, so...
And so, is that on? Yep. There would have been then a moment of thinking, well, how might this all work?
Mm. Yeah, so then we needed to find a pole dancing community, and finding one that had a downstairs studio, which was impossible. We only found one with upstairs, but it worked out quite well because she's got to warm her arms up to get upstairs, so she sits on her bottom and uses her arms to back up the step one by one because it needs to be safe for everybody as well, but that's part of her warm-up. So she's, so by the time she gets to the top, her arms are warmed up and then she's ready to start doing the extra. And we use pole dancing not just for, it's social. She goes to general classes with all the other women her own age, but we also use it for her physical therapy. So she doesn't do therapy. We've never done therapy. If you're 29 and you've had 29 years of therapy, you would be well and truly therapied out. So we don't do any therapy. We always make sure that what we need in her physical needs is embedded in her everyday needs. She needs a couple of people to support her with that for the therapy stuff. So she does a private session where she's doing a therapy. But when she joins the classes, all the other women spot each other, so she's engaged with those women. Yeah, so do you want me to elaborate any more on that one, or? Well,
I just wondered, I I just wondered about in that community, more has evolved, so I'm just wondering about looking for opportunities for that subtle connection in, or subtle or not subtle, like how you kind of looked out for those opportunities. And also then there's that element of, if you're looking out for others to be there for someone who are part of that community, that's when to step forward, when to step back, when to step in, kind of all these little nuances.
Yeah, and it's a dance that you've got to try and get used to. And I think we're talking about having to be in places to be there and build relationships. And sometimes you're there and the relationships are not working, but that's okay, because I think we've all been to something new and we've gone to try something out. And the first time you're there, you feel like a fish out of water. And the second time, you're still feeling like a fish out of water, but quite often if you keep going, if it's something you're passionate about and you keep going, finally you've been there long enough for people to see you and actually acknowledge that you're there, and if they see your face, so they starts with hellos. And then there'll be days where you're feeling like people aren't engaging with her. But the thing is, they've got their own things going on in their own lives. It's not necessarily they're ignoring her, it's just that they're preoccupied with something else. But once you've been there long enough, then you actually can see those nuances, that it's just, that's typical every day. But now she's been there for 10 years, she's been involved in that community for 10 years. And so that then moves on to the women have, recently they've just had a dressing, everyone brought all their old clothes in and they all swapped, they had a clothing swap night. And that was huge. That went really, really well. They have games nights. They'll have a popcorn night, or there'll be a pole dancing competition that they'll all gather and watch together. And then I think the next slide moves on to.
Yep.
So in our local community, we have an event called, it's not happening at the moment, hopefully we'll get it going again, but we've had 2 years where they had an event called Porch Fest, which is it's all amateur performers in their local community, kids, adults, everyone. They have a schedule, and there's performances that happen on every porch, or on a lot of porches around the town. We live in a small regional town. And basically you follow the schedule and go from porch to watch the various different performances. And so Rachel's friends from Pole brought the portable pole. It's set up in our back driveway, and basically they did a performance. All the girls performed, and one of her other friends also played the piano, and they were performing to the piano. It was all impromptu. We didn't have any practiced routines or anything. They just did it, and it went off brilliantly. And then this is all the people watching, the community. And there were people there that we've known for years and had no comprehension that she could do these things. And so it was just, wow, it just gave a whole nother layer for people to know who Rachel was.
That's really cool, Joe. I think, and from thinking back to that slide of like the 7 functions of community, like learning is one of those. And so people learning from each other, learning about each other, and certainly there's an element of health. You know, we know connected communities are healthy communities, and certainly, I mean, I don't know a lot about the health benefits of pole dancing, but it looks pretty hard. I'd imagine that it's pretty physically. Yeah. So I think there's multiple facets there. I'm really just curious too about the when, say, Porch Fest was coming about. There's many. You would have looked at the that community and the event of Porch Fest. How did you go about going, this is an opportunity to have a role here and contribute? Or was it pretty just natural? You knew Rachel was a pole dancer, and why not?
No, the first year we actually did piano. So she was learning piano to help with the dexterity for her device. And so we had a whole group of people, because we thought, well, she was limited in the amount of piano she could play, but we thought we need to put on a performance. So we gathered some people that we knew that could give some broad range of an opportunity for others to have a performance that maybe had not had those opportunities. And so so we did the piano the first year, but basically because I'm looking for any opportunity that's connecting with community, and how can we tap into that? That was the original. And then I started thinking after that first event, that it would be really good if we could do the pole. And we were hiring a portable pole during COVID so that we could continue. And so we had the pole set up in the backyard for quite a period of time during COVID. And so it just was. I think you've got to constantly use that muscle of thinking and being creative and looking at every opportunity. And the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. So constantly looking at things that, even if you can't even figure out that it's anything that's relevant to you, if you write everything down, any random thoughts that anyone comes up with, and it's amazing how you'll, because pole dancing, that was like, she was 12 and she was, 10 or 12 before we did she was 10 or 12 when we thought of pole dancing as a joke, and then it became a reality. So that's just because we planted that seed back then.
That's great. And probably, one last thing, and I can't recall if there was another slide here, but
slide, yeah.
well, I'll move on. But the one thing I wonder too is, and it might be for everyone when they get there, is how do you then look out for those subtle opportunities? Because there's been many times where I've been a part of things like, oh, I missed that, and even people that are involved in that community, in this case, Rachel, you might not have that relay of that information because some things are quite sporadic. They go for coffee or they do this. Yes. It's not. So how do you be aware of those?
Yeah, I think so her support team have come to me with different ideas at different times, and I've sort of dismissed. They say something and I'll dismiss it, and then but I'm somebody that always reflects. So I quite often will go through what happened through the day, and if I've sort of dissed something, I sort of get a bit, oh, hang on, I shouldn't have done that, because we're human, we're in our homes, and we're not necessarily, we've got to be we're not turned on all the time as if we're out at work. So in our homes, sometimes you can just disregard things, and something that's said in just a, by the way manner. So I tend to do a lot of reflection, and then I'll go back and I'll have a conversation with that person and unpack it a little bit to see if there is anything in it, and it quite often something will come out of it. So
that's great. That art of reflection. I'll let you talk more about this slide.
So we did you saw the previous photo was with Rachel pole dancing out on the back driveway. Following that, we then went around the town to look at all the other performances, and we ended up on the final one was the top photo, which was a crazy band, was a whole lot of fun, and there was a whole lot of these three women on this side, Rachel and her two friends, and a whole lot of other people were all dancing out the front on the front lawn of that house. And from that, Rachel built connections. So we went to the after party. There's the dancing up there. We went to the after party, which was at the local pub. The minute we walked in, these three women saw us and called Rachel over straight away. They wanted to know all about her. They wanted to talk to her, engaged. Rachel's also an artist. She's got a micro enterprise, and we had been toying with the idea of how do we connect in with the artistic community. And one of them runs the local Archibald art competition. The other one owns an art gallery, and the other one's a framer. So how do you know? That just fell in our lap. So, and from that, the photo on this side is going out for a social night with the art group. And this one here was following that. We went up to the street for some live music, and Rachel and Kimmy went up to the street, up to the dancing, and were dancing up the street. And they've had numerous catch-ups from there. So, yeah, and the band here. And then from that, these two ladies, Kimberly had an art exhibition, and that Rachel went along to the art exhibition. So there's lots of opportunity connecting in with that. And I think we were talking yesterday, there's quite often, there's the peaks and flows of the energy and things that are going on in your world. So sometimes you're full on and you've got lots happening, and then there's other times that it just quietens down, but it's just keeping the momentum and knowing that, oh, there's not much happening here, but knowing that that cycle will come around again. Yeah.
There's so much in that, and I think the really neat around the power of associational life, the Porch Fest being kind of a quite informal neighborhood association, and then that's made up of people, and all of those people, similar to people's loved ones here or themselves, has gifts, talents, interests, passions, and you've just happened to find three people who all love art and framing, and coincidental.
Fell into our lap.
So the power of, if you had looked elsewhere, that might not have been the case. Yeah. Any more you want to share before I move to Alex? Yeah, thank you. And this is in no particular order here. I don't know how we put together the order. So Alex, maybe you just start by talking a bit about Dan and go from there.
Okay, so Dan is now 40. He lives in his own house. He has lived in his own house since 2007, thereabouts. So the story I'm going to tell really is about an earlier part of Dan's life and how he actually got into his house, which was a little bit unusual. So Dan's a very large man. He's 193 centimetres tall and he weighs 110 kilograms. And he's extremely strong, which is, some of these things are good and bad. So fortunately he has a level of charisma about him, so people tend to be forgiving in lots of ways. He also has a brain injury. He had a brain injury when he was a baby. So he struggles with excuse me, emotional regulation, and he has limited cognitive abilities. And so we decided in his post-school situation to divide up what he did during the day and where he lived. Home is really important and requires lots of thinking about, but everybody needs to do something in the day, every day, that's useful and constructive. And he's built a whole way of being, really, around one of his great passions, which is newspapers, which would make people like Rupert Murdoch and various other newspaper proprietors weep with happiness, because he's got to be the best customer for newspapers. And he's developed newspapers into a way of managing his anxiety. So he feels much happier with a newspaper or two, or maybe even more, under his arm. And it's a really reasonably socially acceptable thing. So he gives, newspapers have particular personalities. They do certain things that are important to Dan. And if that doesn't happen, Dan can become extraordinarily anxious. I think I was going to talk about a story when I was asked for help and it was a bit risky. Is that where we're at? I have 4 children. Dan's the youngest. He's 40. The eldest one is now 46, I think. One of my daughters used to make films. She doesn't make films anymore. She decided she needed a day job. But one of her films won the Bondi Film Festival. And so the first prize to winning the Bondi Film Festival was a trip to Utah in the United States to the Sundance Film Festival. So for a variety of reasons, it was decided that I should also go as well. I won't really go into the rather complicated reasons why that was the case. And so the intention was for me, and who was really Dan's main supporter, Dan's main caring person, and my daughter Bronwyn to go to Utah for about 3 weeks. So we live in Grafton, northern New South Wales. We have no other family who lives in Grafton. We have Dan's support workers were all quite young. So the question was, what are we going to do with Dan for 3 weeks, who lived at that stage in the family home, until one 18-year-old girl who was Dan's one of Dan's support workers said, well, she could move into the family home and look after Dan. So what could possibly go wrong? And as it turned out, nothing went wrong. It went amazingly well. And so I went off to hobnob with the various film lovers in Utah and go skiing and all those sorts of things, and came back after 3 weeks. And Dan said, what are you doing back? I'm having a great time here. You should go away. And so I decided, well, maybe this was a good time that Dan thought about leaving home, because he noted that his older siblings had all sort of got left home and gone off on their own way, and that he should do that too. And so, to cut a long story short, some friends helped identify a suitable house, which was at the time affordable. Once upon a time, real estate in rural New South Wales was cheap, but now it's not. But it was then. And so we found a house that was just around the corner from the newsagent, which was very important. And it was affordable. It was near the bus stop. It was near some shops, and Dan seemed to like it. And so Dan moved in, but we didn't really have the resources to support him in his own home on a full-time basis. We could support him during the day. That was already up and running and working quite successfully. But so in the beginning, we thought, well, someone needed to be with Dan overnight because no one thought it was possible that Dan could be on his own safely overnight. Until relatively shortly after Dan moved in, there was nobody to support Dan overnight other than me. And in Dan's mind, I lived in that house up the road, and he lived in this house, and I should live in my house, and he should live in his. And that was all there was to it. And so we had a lengthy discussion about this with Dan, and eventually Dan wasn't going to budge because he'd really bought into this home stuff, and this was his home. And so I did a deal with him whereby I would go home and stay there, and he would go to bed, and he would stay in bed all night until one of his support workers came in the morning. And so I did, and he did. And it's been that way ever since. And nobody, maybe even especially me, thought that it was possible. And that was all, it happened because in a sense we took a chance on an unusual set of circumstances, and it paid off, and it led to other good things happening.
That's really cool. Yeah, there's so much in that, and I think also the you never know what to expect and what's going to come out of a situation. And I know we've talked outside of this about kind of risk and some of that. How did you sort of unpack, even just briefly, in either of those situations, like it can be easy to be very risk averse, almost to the point of not having opportunities. Then how did you kind of unpack that risk and inform others, or sort of manage that with others in either situation, either the going to Utah or Dan, your uncertainties about Dan being home overnight?
Well, it comes a little bit back to my philosophy of life in some respects, and I have a scientific training, so I look at numbers because numbers often tell you lots of things which are a bit different from how you feel about stuff, and generally speaking, people are afraid of the wrong things. The most dangerous people in your life are your friends and relatives, yet they're the people we trust the most as well. And generally speaking, out in the general community, whilst there are some bad people, there's not very many of them, and mostly there's a lot of goodwill. And so someone like a Dan, who's an unusual character, he's very big, he has blazing red hair, he walks around with a newspaper, often with an attractive young lady with him, and so he's well known in the community for generally good things, generally. And when things aren't so good, people tend to forgive him. He has this level of charisma where things just wash off him. It's very helpful, really. But generally the community is quite safe. And he's lived in Grafton since he was 4 years old, and he's now 40 years old. And so he knows far more people than I do. There's people who he remembers from school who I don't know who they are anymore because they're now adults, and I used to know them when they were quite young. And they say hello to him, and he says hello to them. And generally the people who he knows would come to his assistance if something goes wrong. He had a difficult. He spent most of his primary school years in a mainstream class, which was really beneficial because he got to know lots of people. And high school was nowhere near as successful, and ultimately he got kicked out. But the take-home message from high school was that lots of the kids thought he was really badly treated by the school. And because schools in New South Wales are sort of rigidly streamed, so Dan was tended to be in the lower stream. Lots of those kids have a lot of potential for lots of social problems, and maybe they're the people out there in the middle of the night causing mischief who would look after him if something went wrong. So he knows the right people at the right time in the right places. Whereas often we're all hiding in our houses, keeping ourselves safe, or so we think. But it's the community out there in all its diversity that keeps a potentially vulnerable person, albeit a very large vulnerable person, so that of itself keeps him safe to some degree as well. It's those people that make it possible for vulnerable people to exist in our world in a good way.
That's very great, Alex, and that might be a good place. I'll come back to you if I have any questions, or if we have time, other people might have questions. But might go over to Elise. Yeah.
Hello, lovely to see everyone. So you're going to be the master clicker.
Unless you
Yeah, no, go for it. So I'm mum to Nina. Nina's just turned 18 and loved voting for the first time. That was very exciting. A little bit about Nina, just some of the roles we'll talk about today she's been in community. Nina is an artist. She's a micro-enterprise owner. She loves food. She's a friend. Cats feature very largely in Nina's world and turn up in a lot of her artworks. Nina is pretty active in community. She volunteers at our local co-op. She also volunteers at our local community kitchen. And she has a fairly busy physical schedule for exercise. She goes to all the typical exercise classes, Pilates, yoga, aqua. And so she's out there in community having lots of great conversations with people, and she's known and valued and connected in her community. And I think that's really been brought home in some of the roles she's had. I'd describe it a bit like a lasagna. I think when you're present in community, you start with one layer and one role, and when you have conversations with people and you let them know, you share some of the vision of that good life that you're looking for, very typical things, people bring you information. They'll share opportunities with you that you wouldn't be aware of. So, Ricky, I think the next slide is one of the roles that Nina has. So Nina loves going to aqua, and she befriended a lovely lady who moved to town who's also a cat lover. So they bonded over their love of cats. Anyway, this lady was aware that Nina's been looking for some paid work, and she said, look, I'd like to pay you to do some cat sitting while I'm away. So that led to a vocational role, even though it was just a little short-term thing. And Nina has loved that. So it combined her two loves, cats, and she's looking for work. So that was a really nice community role that came out of that natural support and connection in community from people. We've found in lots of situations over time that being in community with great people is often what we're looking for. Like Joe, you mentioned earlier, sometimes we don't know where this is going. But all I'll say is if the relationship's good in typical opportunities. The next slide. So here's Nina at the community kitchen. The other thing, Ricky, I think you touched on earlier is it's not a one-way street. When you're in community, community is an exchange. So Nina initially volunteered and is still a volunteer at Community Kitchen. Usually they create a free meal for people in our community once a week on a Wednesday night. So Nina goes along to help prepare and serve the meal. She's been through lots of different roles. This has also been super helpful because, again, she's looking for paid work and food is one of her vocational themes that we're exploring. But in terms of the exchange opportunity, Nina goes, she has no support worker with her when she's at Community Kitchen. The people themselves, the natural supports, know her well and give her very clearly defined roles. She knows what's expected and she is loved and missed when she's not there. And in fact, someone found out Nina loves cats, so the crew actually made her a cat clock, which was a gift for her, and she was so excited. So you can see how a lot of the themes that Nina loves crops up again and again, cats and food. They'll come back. And people, I think, really enjoy making connections. Ricky, I think, again, that was your point. Sometimes people haven't had the opportunity to form friendships with people with disability, and they love it. They really enjoy the exchange, like any friendship. It's not about disability, it's about what have we got in common. So probably leaning into things that we love is another reason that Nina, over the past 2 years, found herself in an art program called Work of Art. So Work of Art was run by Regional Arts New South Wales, and I guess if you're a young artist, you go and look at arts organisations and think, where are the typical opportunities? So Work of Art was the major one, but there were other things that have come before that. So a little bit about Nina's art journey and why we encouraged her in that pathway. From a very young age, one of Nina's natural gifts is she would always do a drawing and make a card for people. So I think probably about 8 years ago now, Nina was involved in a micro grant opportunity for emerging artists to work with a local designer or printer and develop some cards. So she then developed a relationship working on her drawing. So I guess she worked with a mentor who helped her translate her own artwork into visual mediums. So we then found ourselves on this whole pathway through the Regional Arts Network of opportunities. She applied to this program. She was one of, I think, 150 applications. It was an open call out. And she was really fortunate to be among all these amazing women from all around New South Wales who have really different artistic backgrounds. Some are theatre makers. Fanny Lumsden, the musician, was one of the mentors. So they had different mentors for each, I guess, skill. So Fanny was a music mentor. And the other picture, Ricky, I think we showed earlier, was with Harry Fasher, who was one of Nina's mentors. Harry's a sculptor. So there's all these awesome experiences, women who've done these amazing things. And I found for Nina, being present in community and developing friendships over time has always worked really well for her, because a one-off event, as Jo mentioned, maybe it doesn't go well the first time. But when people know you over a period of time, that's when the friendships and the connections and, oh, I know you and I know you love cats and how you're going with your new design, that's when those conversations start to happen. So I would say that opportunity I was thinking about your drawing, Ricky, before. You had the drawing of the tripod where being a creator or a maker was at the top. And I would say Nina has, in some of her roles, been able to do that. And the story of the cat jacket, so you can see here, this was some of Nina's designs. One of the cat fabric was printed as part of the outcome. And we actually, with an encouragement of a local dressmaker she was working with, she had it made into a jacket. And that's probably one of my big tips for families is Nina does need a little bit of communication support. She is verbal, but sometimes what happens in conversations, she might miss details. So I'm a lover of a prop, and her jacket was an amazing calling card. So when she's out in community or she has done public speaking, is such a great conversation starter, because people come up and say, Nina, I love that jacket. Tell me the story of the jacket. And the other thing that's current at the moment, sorry Ricky, if you flick to the end, the exhibition card, Nina has her first solo exhibition coming up, which she's been working on for 2 years, so this is a big project. But that card is awesome, because every time she's somewhere, she's at her Pilates class, she's out in community, or she's at the community kitchen, she gets to talk to people and hand them a card and say, I'd love you to come to my exhibition, and everything they need to know is on that card. So I think I found that has been a great conversation starter for her, to use that as a tool to further conversations, and people then have the information and they follow up. And we have had art opportunities where she's done a project called Work in Progress, where she's done a public presentation and shared the work she's been developing for her art exhibition, and she had to get up and give a speech. But lots of people from different parts of her life came to that presentation. And I think it's because when you share with your community what you're up to and you share your vision for that good life, that it's very typical. And people want to be enthusiastic about positive things and they want to come and join you. So we've just found that it's been, as I said, the lasagna thing. One little opportunity leads to another, and it's just sort of layered in together. And you just don't know, as Jo said, we might be one day standing next to a pole, but it might be one drawing as a little girl has led to a whole investigation into an art practice that may, Nina also has a micro-enterprise, Nina Frankie, where we are looking at some of her designs being used on different applications, whether that's fabric or other things. So it's her way of communicating to the world what's important to her. Yeah.
Thanks, Elise, and thanks, Dan. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, maybe join me in just thanking them. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Just in terms of time, there may be questions. We will have morning tea soon, so that's a great time to drag them aside and grill them on questions very forcefully when you have a break time. So thank you. Appreciate it. If I had another hour, we could really unpack and kind of, there's so many great takeaways from each of those stories. Yeah, I never thought we'd be using language like lasagna or prop during some of that, but here we are. And I think what that shows is that there's a real informality to community life. You know, there's a real feeling to a lot of this. The things that we heard each of them share, there's assets in all of that. And so when people hear the word asset, a lot of times you might have heard that, although I can't say I'm one of them yet, but you have an asset. It might be, you know, we think about it financially, that we've got these assets there, or our home, the asset. When we think about assets in asset-based community development, a lot of times that starts at an individual level. So, you know, we heard Elise, Alex, and Joe talk about the assets of both their loved ones, but also the assets of community life, the various associations from the art groups through to some of the other community groups, the businesses of pole dancing and news agents, the physical assets, so the natural and built environment, local neighborhoods, you know, like that's such an untapped resource of, if you live in a home in a neighborhood, you've got people around you, either side, above, below, front and back. There's people there. The home is an asset. It's a gathering space. I mean, they have Porch Fest. What a way to use the assets of the street, the neighborhood, and to really create associational life through that. We heard about some cultural assets of the love for art, the story of the local area, even Dan's interest in newspapers. You know, there's the stories that go with that and the identity. Then there's like the economic assets around everything from the businesses, the news agencies that, you know, Dan would be tapping into and developing relationships there, through to the micro enterprises and the local art collectives that come from that. And then the involvement from institutional life, government and non-government. We didn't hear as much of that, but it would have played a role in terms of there's ways that, say, the art association or a kind of non-government agency would have been involved. And so these are later on in some of the activities, you're going to look at these gifts of your loved one. So what are the things that they know about? Gifts of the head. And you know, you can feel free to take a picture. In the Connected Communities Guide, they've also got a really good just layout of this too. What are the things that they know about that they wouldn't mind sharing or talking about with others? Conversation pieces. People don't have to be experts for it to be a gift. You know, we sort of paint this picture that we have to be experts to share something with someone else or know it all. That's the beauty of doing things together, is each person brings a little bit of something. You know, and Rachel was the expert of many things, but putting it together in terms of the framing and some of the art expertise, you know, she needs someone else to further that, to really expand that. The gifts of the hand, what are things that we know about? Even the carrying of the newspaper can be turned into something, and it's allowed Dan to bring those gifts to community life. And then gifts of the heart, you know, like sometimes gifts of the heart can be things we know about or we're good at doing, but they can also be the importance of relationships or empathy or the love of fun and of sharing local stories or of humor. I think about these lovely young gentlemen. Old coots giving advice. It's probably bad advice, but it's free. So if you're thinking about something to do in your spare time, you could start one of these locally in your area. But this is associational life. So, and I can't take credit for this. I didn't take the photo of these gentlemen, but this is an association. So you can sense that sometimes one of the things that we're up against is institutional life can become quite formal. Rigid structures, rules, ways of relating, things you got to do, paperwork you got to fill out, and associational life doesn't have that formality. Home and local community doesn't necessarily have that formality. That's what makes it. That's what's allowed these people's stories to come about. Yeah, what a gift to the head. Knowledge, a love of the local community, probably a gift to the heart of imparting, the next generation some advice there, even if it's bad advice. I think it's a lot to learn from, people's knowledge and experience. So these are just, there's examples of associational life. When we talk about associations and what's around, this would be everything from the churches to street libraries to learning from neighbors. Like what an opportunity for Porch Fest or some of those others where neighbors can learn from each other. Exchanging meals, sharing hand-me-downs, volunteer visitors. We see tool libraries and equipment sharing popping up all over. So there's tons of ways to have that associational life. And alongside that, this is what we mean by institutions. So where there might be more of a hierarchy, still really it's not to say that institutions are bad. There are things that they can do that people can't. There is some resourcing elements or, kind of systemic change that they might also have a piece to play in there. It's just a different way of relating. And so there's that relational approach. And now after morning tea, when we go out, there's also this looking at physical space and the exchange that happens there. So if I think about out the front here, and I don't know if anyone's sort of been out there of a morning, you've got a few elements. You've got the physical space of the beach and the ocean and the parkland, but then you have businesses that are there and the Surf Lifesavers Club, and you've got across the road this local economy that's here. There's really not only this physical space in how that's used, walking groups and run clubs and surfers, and I think I saw some people going on maybe a first date today. So there's even that. So there's that associational life happening amongst the physical space and the areas of exchange. And so an exchange can also be the local markets. Like it's not just sort of bigger business exchange, but some of the more small formal exchange and even the exchange of stories